Hi, today's topic is critical thinking, and I want to take a little bit of time to talk to you about critical thinking in depth because in order to be a good writer, you have to be a strong thinker. So critical thinking is really essential to good writing. If you look at this photo, you can see what happens when we don't follow the rules or the traffic rules as this example shows in New York City. We end up, when everybody decides to go wherever they want, whenever they want, we end up in a big crunch and nobody's moving. And it's kind of that way with thinking. When everybody's not adhering to good sound logic and reason, we kind of get stuck and we don't tend to move forward or backwards. We're just kind of stuck in place. And so I think that this is a particularly important topic for us to look at just in today's world. So I want to start with a simple question, at least it seems simple. What is intelligence and how do you know if you have it? Of course, you all know where this quote comes from. Stupid is as stupid does, sir. And the converse of that is smart is as smart does. So does that mean that if you act smart, you are smart? It does in a certain way. What it implies is that intelligence is something you do, not just something that you have. In order to be intelligent, it's an active experience. It's not sitting there passively and doing nothing. So for centuries, psychologists believed intelligence is fixed, unchangeable. So you're born with a certain amount of intelligence, and that can never be increased. That means that education teaches you what to think rather than how to think. So that ability of how to think is fixed, and that's what psychologists used to think. And think about what some of the implications of this are. How far can you go in the world if you have an X amount of knowledge that you're born with? There's only X that you can go. You can't learn and increase. You're only learning what you need to think, not how you can think. And thinking about or learning about how you can think is really going to be essential for you as you move forward in your academic career. So then that leads us to the question of what is the difference between factual knowledge and intelligence? And we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit. So what is passive learning and what is active learning? The human mind has the potential for thinking. The more a person develops this potential, the more intelligent the person becomes. We can never know our intellectual potential until we begin to develop it. So this is the modern day thinking of intelligence, that that it's not just passive, that we don't just have X amount and we need to figure out what to do with that X amount. It's that it is only limited by our willingness or our ability to think and to grow. So what is thinking? Thinking is purposeful mental activity. It is something that you actively do. You decide to do it. You control it. It does not control you. And this is different from daydreaming, because I want you to think about daydreaming. Your mind just kind of wanders and you go here and there, and you may not have anything real concrete that you're trying to figure out or to do. But thinking is when you're actively trying to problem solve or to learn a mathematical equation or something like that. And there are types of or dimensions of thinking. There's reflective thinking, when you think about experiences and you identify your challenges, maybe your successes. There's creative thinking, which produces new ideas that will help you meet or figure out a problem. And then there's critical thinking, which asks you to look at your ideas and decide which is the best. So maybe you're trying to decide between a strawberry or chocolate shake. And so you're going to use your critical thinking skills and to decide which one you prefer. So why is shallow, illogical thinking so common? Think about some examples of shallow and illogical thinking. Why do we do it? And what do we gain from it? Um, I would argue or propose that shallow and illogical thinking is popular or prevalent because it's easy. It doesn't require energy from us. It doesn't require us to work very hard. And I think that it's pretty normal to want to take the easy way rather than the more challenging way. Um, but the problem with that is that when you don't think deeply and you just blindly accept things, then you're missing your opportunity for growth and for learning. So really shallow, illogical thinking keeps you from growing and learning and becoming a more thoughtful, educated person. Truth or alternative facts. One of the things that we will talk about throughout this semester is alternative facts, and of course that's something that you've heard a lot about. And I just want to say right up front, there's no such thing. It's either true or it's not true. We don't have alternative facts in this class because it's not part of good thinking. So truth is discovered. It's not something that you make up. Ideas are interrelated. So our mind naturally makes these connections between one thought to another. That's how our brain works. A statement cannot be both true and false at the same time. It is either true or it's false. It may be true at a particular time and false at another time, but it can't be both at the same time. Everyone makes mistakes, even the experts. So it's important for us to keep this in mind when we are exploring and thinking about truth and what is real and what our values are and what our principles are, is that people make mistakes. They do. And ideas can be examined without embracing them. And why that's important is that you can look at let's take a political philosophy that's completely different from yours. And that doesn't mean that it threatens your beliefs or in some way weakens what you believe. It's just good, sound thinking to look at other ways of understanding politics, for example. Something that's so key and that we do naturally, I feel like, is feeling is not a substitute for thinking. We feel something is good or we feel that something is right, but that doesn't make it right. We need to use logic and reason and look at facts to determine if something is right or not. And that's going to be challenging. So some key habits and skills of good thinking. Be curious. Question things, ask questions, look beyond the obvious. Make sure that you can distinguish between facts and opinions. We hear opinions presented as facts all the time, and so you want to make sure that you can tell the difference between the two. And some examples of that is consult everyday experience. Is this something that you know to be true? Consider the opinion's consequences. What are the consequences of this belief, this opinion? What are some of the implications of it? When isn't it true or when is it wrong? What are some counterexamples, some examples that contradict it? What's the reverse opinion? And look for relevant research. Research is something that we're going to be using throughout this semester, this summer, to really focus on our beliefs, our opinions, no, not opinions, sorry, our arguments. And so in order to make good, strong arguments, we have to have good, relevant research. Your argument is only as good as your evidence. So critical thinking defined, this is the actual definition, is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. That is a mouthful. So critical thinking in its best form is based on universal intellectual values that transcend subject matter. So it doesn't matter what your topic is. If you use or incorporate these critical thinking skills, or these intellectual values have to do with critical thinking regardless of the topic. So clarity, accuracy, precision, consistency, relevance, sound evidence, good reasons, depth, breadth, and fairness. And we'll talk about these more in depth. Critical thinking includes the examination of those structures that I just listed or elements of thought implicit in all reason. Purpose, problem, question at issue, assumptions, concepts, empirical grounding, reasoning leading to conclusions, implications and consequences, objections from alternative viewpoints, and frame of reference. Good critical thinking is skillful and responsible thinking in which you study the problem from all angles and then exercise your best judgment to draw conclusions. Again, this is not opinions, this is not feelings. This is your judgment based on as much evidence as you can possibly gather. Here's a little chart that shows some of the elements of good reasoning, and I just want to kind of go through it quickly. Intellectual standards of clarity. So clarity means that it is clear, it's brief, it is to the point, that there's something concrete that you are examining. Accuracy and precision, that you're being specific, that it's not some huge universal thing that you can't break down into pieces. And then when you're looking at logic, you want to look at the information, what data, what observation, what facts you have, what are current concepts or theories or definitions. And then relevance is your depth and your breadth. And those are the assumptions. What are the assumptions that are made about your topic or your idea? And what are some of the interpretations or inferences? What are some of the conclusions that can be made with thinking about it or reasoning it through? So now I'm going to break down some of those components of critical thinking that I mentioned. So critical thinking is skillful. You apply it in the form of knowledge of your subject matter to the thinking process. So that means that you have to gather information. Critical thinking is, again, it's not passive. You can't sit around at your desk twirling your pencil and be critical thinking. Critical thinking involves activity. It involves gathering information so that you understand as much as you possibly can about your subject matter. It's responsible, and that's something that tends to get lost in the big picture. Responsible critical thinking is a public, not a private act. The arguments you produce contribute to a larger discourse, the discourse of your community. So in other words, those concepts, those ideas that you are struggling with or are thinking and gathering information about, they belong in a big picture. Both, you might say, in a public sphere, but that public sphere can be anywhere from your home to your community, to your government. So there are a lot of aspects of this public. It's not just the big picture. It can be smaller communities as well. Critical thinking relies on sound criteria for making judgments. A good critical thinker thinks explicitly about why she has drawn her conclusions and lists the reasons for her conclusions. So in other words, you need to know why you think what you think. You can't just say, well, this is what I believe. Well, why do you believe that? Where did that belief come from? What is your experience that tells you that this belief is true? What evidence do you have to support this belief? What data do you have? So it's not just your judgment about what is right or wrong, for example, but why you have formed it. Have you formed it because it's something that your family believes? Have you formed it because it's something that your minister says? Have you formed it because it is a universal law? What has led you to the conclusion that you've come to? You need to develop a presentation that is sensitive to the context. And by that I mean it looks at your idea in the way that the idea is being used. So, for example, if you're talking about politics, you don't want to talk about personal ideologies. You want to talk about the bigger picture. Okay, I'm trying to give you something specific. So if I'm talking about politics, usually in the United States, we have three, there's arguably four different types of perspectives that we look at. We look at Republican, Democrat, sometimes we look at, oh, I can't think of it. My mind just went blank. I can't think of it. Anyway, but independent, that was it. I know. I was thinking Bernie Sanders, but I couldn't for the life of me think of that. So we've got Republican, Democratic, and independent, and there are others as well, but I'm just giving you those three. So you want to look at them in the context of the United States if you're going to conduct a discussion here about the current state of political affairs, let's say. Because it doesn't really matter what's going on in what the French think about independence, or what they think about republicanism or democratism or independence. It doesn't matter what they think when you're talking about the United States government. What matters is how we define those things here. So you always want to conduct a civil, reasoned debate. You want to use logic and reason. And you want to write polished analysis that are examples of excellent argumentative technique. And that's hopefully what you will learn in this class. More components of critical thinking. Good critical thinking is self-correcting. And by that I mean that you're always trying to learn more and to understand more, that you don't ever think that you have the answer, and that you're always willing to say, well, this piece of information changes my perspective a little bit, so that you're willing to stay current and you're willing to consider alternative viewpoints. You're willing to get feedback from others, and you can critique your own ideas. Oh, well, that's a silly thought, or that doesn't make sense, so that you can move further and push yourself more. Critical thinkers raise vital questions and problems. They formulate them clearly and precisely. They gather and assess relevant information using abstract ideas to interpret it effectively and come to well-reasoned conclusions and solutions, testing them against relevant criteria and standards. So again, this just reiterates how hard critical thinking is. Critical thinkers think open-mindedly, and this is hard, within alternative systems of thought, recognizing and assessing as need be their assumptions, implications, and practical consequences. And the reason I say this is hard is because you're questioning yourself and you're questioning your own beliefs. And we're taught pretty much throughout our whole life that, strong people have their opinions and thoughts and ideas, and they don't change those opinions and thoughts and ideas. They stick with it forever. And really, educated critical thinkers are more fluid than that. They're more likely to be able to consider alternative viewpoints and to maybe change their ideas. Critical thinkers, good critical thinkers, communicate effectively with others to figure out solutions to complex problems. And ultimately, that last sentence there sounds really simple, but that is the key to what arguing is all about and to an argument. We argue so that we can communicate effectively with others to figure out solutions to complex problems. That's really our purpose for writing arguments and for conducting them in the political arena, for example. We want to come to a solution. And I'm going to focus on that throughout this semester. So you're going to hear a lot about coming to a solution. Critical thinking, in short, is self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. So you can see how, because it's so dependent on self, it could be easy to be a lazy thinker rather than a critical thinker. Critical thinking presupposes assent to rigorous standards of excellent and mindful command of their use. So in other words, you're putting aside that laziness and you're going to work hard to try to understand something. It entails effective communication and problem-solving abilities and a commitment to overcome our native egocentrism and sociocentrism. For those of you that aren't familiar with those words, egocentrism is when you think that everyone is like you or does things like you. And sociocentrism is very similar. It's that all societies are similar or the same. And so we think that because people are the same way we are, and without respecting or understanding difference of opinion or individuality. Knowledge occurs in a social setting of different individuals with different perceptions, what I was just talking about, and it requires some common basis of agreement for mutually cooperative effort, thus creating the necessity for agreeing on some set of rules for deciding issues and sticking to those rules. This is really the basis of government and of law, is we have to have some kind of baseline for everyone to follow, or we go back to that first page where I showed you all of the cars going every which way. Finally, critical thinking allows us to listen to and try to understand another person's point of view. Respect another as an autonomous source of decision making so that individuals have the ability to come to good decisions that we may not at first understand, but through critical thinking, through analysis and synthesis, we can come to understand and respect that decision while maybe not always agreeing with that decision. Critical thinking allows us to change our opinions in light of superior evidence. So when we get better information, we change our ideas or our thoughts. To have a general open-mindedness to the weight of the evidence rather than personal bias for our own beliefs. And to discover connections and relationships among the relevant issues in our lives. So again, looking at that big picture and seeing how we are all interrelated or interconnected. What that common ground is that we can all relate to. Finally, I asked the question, why are critical thinking skills important in a writing class? And that's because knowledge involves so much more than having an opinion. One of the things that you will hear me say is it's not just your opinion that counts. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. You have to be able to prove and to demonstrate while you are right. And I can see part of this slide is cut off, but the bottom line is good writing requires good thinking. Without one, you can't have the other. So, if you have any questions, please post them in the I Have a Question forum, and I'll talk to you again soon.